האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon, starting the second sefer of the Torah, sefer Shmot, with, of course, Parsha Shmot. And we're going to look tonight, God willing, at Os Gimel. And we're going to read a pasuk from the beginning, towards the beginning of the Parsha, where the Torah tells us that the Mitzrim have changed their view very much radically about Bnei Yisrael, and they now want to oppress the Jewish people. So the pasuk says as follows, that the Torah tells us, right before the Torah tells us that Paro changes his mind, either a new Paro or a person who acted like a new Paro and wanted to oppress the Jewish people. Right before that, the previous pasuk says, this is pasuk Zion, and it says, it's follows Perak Aleph and Shmos pasuk Zion, U'v'nei Yisrael paru v'yishrutzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu b'ma'od ma'od. And Bnei Yisrael was fruitful, and they swarmed, and they multiplied, and they became very, very powerful. V'timolei ha'aretz osam, and the earth was filled with them. The next pasuk is pasuk Ches, Vayakam melech hadash al Mitzrayim, and a new king arose, and it starts talking about the complete change in the relationship that now the Egyptians are planning to enslave the Jewish people. So the Zera Shimshon in Os Gimel is going to focus on that pasuk about Bnei Yisrael multiplying so dramatically. Pasuk, we are in Daf Taf Ayin in the sefer. Pasuk, it says in the pasuk, U'v'nei Yisrael paru v'yishrutzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu b'ma'od ma'od v'timaleha aretz osam. Obviously, we just read that pasuk, Bnei Yisrael, just to translate the words once more time, because he's going to focus on these specific words. Bnei Yisrael was fruitful, that's paru, v'yishrutzu, and they teamed or swarmed, v'yirbu, and they became many, they multiplied, v'yatzmu, and they became powerful, b'ma'od ma'od, very, very powerful, very, very strong. Vatimolei ha'aretz osam, and the earth was filled with them. Kefil kol elu halishonos, the reason that there's so much repetition with different words here to talk about Bnei Yisrael multiplying, lirmos is to hint l'chol hanisim shenasu lahem, to all of the miracles that were done on behalf of Bnei Yisrael to enable them to multiply and to increase so dramatically. The Isa b'Medrash, because it states in the Medrash Rabbah as follows, Shahamitzriyim hayu mischakmin, the Egyptians tried to be very strategic, very wise, kedei sheyisrael yismatu mipirya v'rivya. In the first stage of the Egyptians' plan, they said, you know what? The first thing we need to do is try and somehow slow down and impede the great growth of this Jewish nation, of the Jewish people. So they said to the Jewish men, we need you to work so hard. We appreciate your labors. We need you to stay out in the fields. We can't afford for you to go out to work and then come back in to go home and then come back in the morning. It's too much travel time. We need you to stop going home and to stay out in the workplace. Wherever you work, that's where you need to sleep. And the men therefore had to sleep on the ground. They couldn't go home, etc. And the righteous women of that generation, they used to be together with their husbands intimately between the pots. What that means, and it's a part of the medrash that the Zera Shimshon didn't quote, is that at night the women would bring them hot water, and they would bring them in pots, and they would bring them fish and food in pots, and they would feed them and help them wash them, and they would take care of the men as if they were back in their homes, even though the men were not allowed to come home. And then they would also be together with their husbands and have relations with their husbands, because it was a time of dire necessity. So even though normally that wouldn't have been something considered appropriate, they did it because otherwise there would be no continuity for the Jewish people. Ukeneged zeh, corresponding to this action of the Jewish women to come out to the fields to the men and to be with them there, Omar, the pasuk says, paru, they were fruitful. Shahayu mekaimin pirya v'rivya. This is a hint, this is a remiss to the fact that they continued to fulfill the mitzvah of Pirya V'Rivya, of being fruitful and multiplying, even though the Egyptians were doing everything they could to stop the Jewish people from procreating. Even though the men were not allowed to come home at night to their homes. And they were not allowed to come home and sleep in their beds. Purya. And the word mita in Hebrew and Aramaic is called purya. A bed is purya in Aramaic. Why? Sheparin v'rabin aleha. Because a bed is the place where procreation takes place. So that's how the word bed got its name as purya. So the word paru, going back to the pasuk for a moment, the Zera Shimshon says, Uvenei Yisrael paru, just that one word is hinting to us this whole story from the Medrash, that they had to go to extraordinary lengths, especially the women, to make sure that they would continue to be able to be together and to procreate and to bring children into the world, even though the men could not come home at night. Next paragraph. And now, once the women were pregnant and then it came time for them to give birth, they couldn't do so openly, of course. So, this is continuing with the language of the Medrash Rabbah. They would go into the fields and they would give birth under the trees, under the apple trees. Va'alzeh Omar, and in a reference to this, the pasuk says, Vayishritzu, which is the next word in the pasuk. Uvenei Yisrael haru, they were fruitful. Vayishritzu, and they swarmed, like coming from the word sheretz, which is like little animals that multiply very rapidly. Shehayu noldim basada kishratzim, because they were giving birth in the field like little animals that live outside. And even though outside in the open air, it was dangerous to give birth, and under normal circumstances, many people would die. They would get infections. I mean, after all, picture the dirt and the leaves and the trees and the bugs and everything. You know, no one in a normal situation would ever want to give dirt outside in a field or under a tree. Nonetheless, they multiplied. So that's the third word in the pasuk. So let's pause here for 1 second and go back to the language of the pasuk, because each word in the pasuk, the Zera Shimshon is showing us, is very significant and is alluding a specific fact of what happened back, at a specific reality of what happened back in Mitzrayim. So Uvenei Yisrael paru, they were fruitful. That refers to the fact that the women came out to be with the men who could not come home and take advantage of being in their purya, in their bed. Remember that Aramaic word purya. So the women came out to them, and they managed to continue being fruitful. Vayishritzu, that refers to the fact that the women came and hid in the fields when it was time for them to give birth, just like rodents or little animals would come out and give birth in the fields. Vayirbu, and they managed to multiply and have their children. And their children lived, even though these were not sanitary or healthy conditions. So that's so far those three words he's explained. Now he's going to continue. The od hayu boim malachim, and according to the Medrash, another step, another miracle that happened is that malachim would come when the women gave birth, umenakim osam, umishafrim osam, and they would clean and beautify or clean up the babies, kechayazu, just like an animal, shemishaferes es havlad, who grooms and cleans up the baby that's born to an animal, kedei sheyu briim v'chazakim, in order that they should be healthy and strong. So there was a mamish, such a nace, an open miracle, and malachim would come and clean up the babies in the way that these babies who were born in the field and very, again, as we said, unsanitary circumstances would be clean and healthy and taken care of right after their birth. And like Rabbi Hanina says in Masech Chulin, the word Shabbos there, you can see the parentheses is a mistake. It's a Gemara from Daf Chaf Daled and Beis in Masech Chulin, and over there Rabbi Hanina, who the Gemara tells us at this time was 80 years old, and yet he was very strong and agile like a young man. So he says there, they asked him, how is that possible that at 80 years old you're so strong and agile. Shemen, so he said, Shemen, shesachanti imi biyaldusi, the oil that my mother anointed me with, rubbed on me in my childhood, he umdali be'esik nusi. It has still stood for me in my old age to be strong and healthy. So that's an example of why it's so important to take care of the babies, to clean them well and oil them right after birth and at a young age. And that's what kept Rabbi Hanina healthy. So v'zehu v'ya'atzmu. And this is what the Torah meant by adding the word, and they became powerful, they became strong. According to Zera Shimshon, that's a reference to what the Medrash Rabbah tells us about the malachim coming and cleaning and oiling the babies, the newborns actually, and that helped them be strong and healthy. And after all these other Lashonos, the Torah says very much, very much. Lirmos, to give a hint to another statement in the Medrash, al shtei igolin, on the two cakes. The Malachim took care of the babies and left two cakes for each of the babies. Echad shel shemen ve'echad shel devash. One was of oil and one was of honey, v'chule, etc. V'kivan shahayu makirim. So that's what it means when it says me'od me'od. Very, very. It repeats the word very, very, according to the Zera Shimshon, to allude to a further nace, which is that the babies were given these two cakes, an oil cake and a honey cake, that they could eat that would be healthy for them and good for them right after their birth. Now we have babies that are very hard to hide at this point. The women, if they bring them back home, they'll be discovered. If they leave them in the fields, they'll probably be discovered. So the Mitzrim ended up seeing the babies, Ratzu lahargam, and the Egyptians wanted to kill the babies as soon as they saw them. V'nasem lahem nes, and another additional miracle was done. V'hayu nivloim b'karka. The Medrash says the babies were enveloped by the ground, hidden by the ground, and the Egyptians couldn't find them and couldn't see them. So the Egyptians would maybe hear crying from a baby, and they would run out and look in the fields, and the nace was done that they were not able to find the babies. Vizehu, and this is what the last phrase of the pasuk means, Vatimale haaretz osam, that the earth was full of them, shahayu nivlaim besocha, that they were covered up by the earth. And so that was the last of the miracles that happened. So that's the end of the piece, but let's go back and understand what the Zera Shimshon has done for us. When we read that pasuk, or possibly when many people read that pasuk, we think to ourselves, okay, the Torah is telling us that Bnei Yisrael multiplied tremendously. And in order to tell us how incredible was the level of their growth, it uses all these words, paru, vayishratu, vayirbu, vayatzmu, me'od, me'od, vatimoleo aretz osam. So many Bnei Yisrael grew as a nation so incredibly rapidly and to such incredible numbers. So the Zera Shimshon says, yes, that's true, that's all true, but every single word, of course, in the Torah is important and has specific meaning, and he just showed us how each of these words, paru, yishratu, and yirbu, and yatzmu, and ma'od, ma'od, each one of those words was a reference to, a hint, a remez to the story in the Medrash Rabbah that gives us a list of the different miracles that happened in order for Bnei Yisrael to continue to procreate and to continue not only just be able to maintain their size, but to grow and expand as rapidly and as dramatically as they did.